Hi there, and welcome to Queer Armorer. One of the most common questions I get is what handgun to choose. And that is, there's probably several books that could be written just on the theory behind that, although get a Glock is usually not wrong. But recently, I've had a large number of people ask me, should I just use blank? After all, it's what the military uses. And I wanted to push back against that, because just because the military picks something doesn't inherently make it good, even for something like a weapon. So I thought it would be a good idea to go through some of the military's dumb choices when it comes to firearms, why they've picked some of what they've picked in the past, and some of why they've picked what they've picked now. Especially because I still, in 2023, see people carrying a 1911. So I'm going to start this off with a quote. No. Because I still see people in 2023 trying to argue that the 1911 is an inherently superior design and is what everyone should be using. So I'm going to start off with a quote from Ivan, who is one of the most prolific designers in the 3D firearms space. Please do remember, when I'm talking about the 1911, I don't think there's any firearm that's at all vaguely modern that if you don't practice with it, you'll be better with that. And I think there's a lot of what wouldn't be the best for a certain situation that would be perfectly adequate if you are practiced with it. So, please don't think that I'm sitting here saying you have to throw it out or it is garbage. Just take a second and listen to what Ivan says. The 1911 is a dogshit design that deserves nothing more than to have its image ruined and corpse inhabited with AR-15 parts. And that is exactly what he did. He created the 3011 because, realistically, at this point, the 1911 is known more for its memes than for its capability. And for a lot of them, a better use case is put it into a fun meme range build. And if you're wondering, well, why do I care what Ivan thinks? Ivan is one of the most prolific designers of our generation when it comes to firearms and 3D printing specifically. He is one of the main developers behind the FGC-9. He is one of the main developers behind the printable Set Me See project, the Amigo Grande. He's one of the main developers behind the Plastikov, the plastic framed AK, and one of the main developers behind the U-Bar, the plastic framed AR. If you want to talk about somebody who knows modern firearms, that is somebody who is designing and implementing the next generation of firearms. And it's worth noting why 45 became a meme in the first place. So, during the Philippine Revolution, we're using these. Model 1892 Colt revolvers. There's a version that goes to the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, but everybody is using 38 caliber revolvers. And during the Philippine Revolution, it's worth pointing out that there was a lot of racist colonial bullshit going on. The Philippines had declared independence. Spain had said LOL okay then, and then tried to give the colony to the United States. And we went in looking in to extract value, and we weren't really great with the locals. So when it came to how we were fighting against the insurgency that was rising up against us, trying to just come in and take things over, we had sent a somewhat ill-equipped force. There were a lot of guns that were jamming and a lot of firearms that were not quite up to the task of handling jungle heat and jungle rust, especially in an age where we were still figuring out how do metal. This ends up forcing a large number of interactions to resort to sidearms, and the sidearms are seen to only to not stop the threat in a number of cases. And there's a lot of misunderstanding at the time as to why. They think that, they must be on drugs. It's the only reason why it seems like we're able to shoot them and it doesn't affect them as much. Or maybe they're like religious kooks who just can like ignore their own physical sensation by just praying to their god. Or just flat out trying to make really racist arguments around, well, maybe they feel less because they have less evolved whatever. Like, there was a lot of bullshit that was being pushed as the idea for why our revolvers are frequently not stopping. But there was a request for basically a desperate request for any weapons that they had available, including but not limited to. It's also worth pointing out that the Army recognized when they were setting up the cartridge that they picked that revolvers tended to get beat the fuck up at the time. This was the first double action revolver, and not them wanting to avoid the situation where the guns blow up in a soldier's hand and injure the soldier, they put a slightly weaker version of the 38 special cartridge together that is dedicated to this round. Yeah, people think Army ammunition automatically means it's the strong stuff, but it means it's changed for something the Army wanted, and you have to look into what did they change, and why did they change it. Sometimes it means they added powder. Sometimes it means they took some powder out. Sometimes it means they used a bigger bullet. Sometimes it means they used a smaller one. It really depends on what the need was or what they were trying to fix. A lot of the Tagalog insurgent groups were using a very strange kind of reed armor that wasn't bulletproof by any measure. However, at the time, all ammunition was full metal jacket. All ammunition is basically these rocks that are being thrown through people. So their armor was these really tight reeds that would make it almost a little bit difficult to breathe, but once you got used to it, it meant that if you were punctured, the armor essentially functioned as a wound containment of sorts. It would essentially be the hands holding the wound tight. That combined with, at the time, a lot of the locals were seeing a colony having all of its value be extracted after they were traded. They were treated as property. And recognizing that they need to fight and without getting into the fascinating story that is like several days long, that is the beginnings of the Philippine War, they get pushed into fighting before they have all of their assets developed. So there's pockets and militias that are under-equipped. So some of the early tactics include a form of suicide attack, where there's an understanding that you are setting yourself up to do damage, and your goal, if you are hurt, is not to get away and heal. Your goal is keep doing damage until you die, which, even for a soldier, can be hard to face and see coming against you. And it ends up leading that when the Army is digging through their giant stash of weaponry and basically throwing everything that they can into the Philippine Revolution because everything's been jamming and everything is breaking. What do you have? Please, dear God, send us something. One of the things that they get requests for is, please send us those 45 revolvers. And those end up getting used. The jungle trench warfare ends up meaning that, like, a lot of the weapons that we had developed that were kind of longer and were thinking, oh, we'll be fighting in fields, weren't really well equipped to this style of combat. So a lot of situations ended up, well, pull out your revolver, you're fighting with that now. And while we happen to have more effect, we also had just more weapons and more troops and far more support, and the Moro are losing numbers. And you have to remember, at this point, they're looking at the destructive efforts of the beginning, and they're starting to think, okay, we're not going to win this immediately. We have to start thinking long term. They stop with the suicide attacks, start thinking more like an insurgent group, and get ready for a decade of slowly chipping away at getting their freedom, which also makes it look like the battles are stopping and the fight is being won. And because of this, there is this myth that breaking out the 45 revolvers is the thing that won the Philippine Revolution. And it really didn't, but soldiers learn more from other soldiers than they do from any training, and that myth is pushed everywhere. There is also a thing when you are fighting. You have to convince yourself you are this badass, capable warrior. You are not the problem. You're gonna fucking punch through anything. It can't be your fault. It must be the gun. And a little bit of that is kind of needed in order to like, it can't be you. You have to be convincing yourself you are just able to do this. You are not going to be the problem. Even if, you're human and there might be a moment where you screw up something. Or, as is the case in a lot of soldiers, you're just young and inexperienced and you don't know what you're doing. 1907, these are adopted. Basically, a scaled up version of the Colt Army that is called the New Action Army. It is pushed into service in 1909. However, early versions in 1907 are used for the 1907 pistol competition as sort of a control group. And they have a requirement for the next trial that all of these are going to be 45 pistols. Colt submits the 1907, chambered in 45 ACP. However, note the lack of the external safety and note the lack of the grip safety. At this point, this is borderline a Colt Glock in terms of operations. Colt is ready to rock. There is very little in the way of external safety. The Noble automatic pistol, which was viewed by everybody who handled it as probably incapable of surviving the trials, so they kind of just patted Arthur Noble on the head and handed him the pistol back, and we're like, yeah, we're not fucking trying this, sorry. Interestingly, the Luger that everybody knows of, the 9mm Luger fame, 9mm Parabellum is also referred to as 9mm Luger because the gun that 9mm Parabellum was invented for was the Luger pistol. They tried scaling their pistol up to 45 and submitted that for the trials. The Bergmann automatic pistol, which you might recognize as later becoming the pistol the Mandalorian carries. The Savage automatic pistol, which we'll get back to that one in a second. The White Merrill 1907, which has a fascinating party trick that none of these other pistols have, actually. It is the only pistol submitted to the trial that you can operate fully with one hand. The weird finger grip actuates a slide catch that will allow one hand to chamber around or clear the weapon, which, considering a large number of use cases for sidearm is when you are wounded, that's legitimately a fascinating concept. Although apparently from the field trials, they were not reliable. Also submitted was a Webley Foster revolver that was rechambered into 45 ACP. However, the folks from Webley were swearing that the 455 Webley was a superior loading and America should just switch to that. Gee, I wonder why. Now, none of these are selected. However, all of the officers agree the Colt is the best built. and all of the officers agree that the Savage is the best handling because it has the best angle of grip, and it has a grip safety, which means if you're not gripping it, it won't go off. Now again, the next pistol that is introduced is the 1909, which is a 45 long Colt. It is the Colt New Action Army. However, the next pistol to be adopted is the M1911, which on the one hand has the slide assembly and vague look of the M1907, and on the other hand has that external safety and grip safety, which the military kind of just like shared with Colt. Now, in 1919, they're building 1911s as fast as they can, but because pistols are kind of low on the production requirement list, they're not building that many. And they end up taking some of the new action armies and just rechambering them into 45 ACP, and that becomes the 1919. And I want to make it clear, during World War II, they serve with distinction, especially tanker crews, especially a lot of airmen have some stories of using them. I also want to point out they spent most of the war in the holster of a soldier that was using another weapon to fight the war. 1911's sidearms, and sidearms are not the things that win wars. There is no two world wars. It happened to be there. It was a two world war participant, which is always funny to me because the people who are talking about my two world wars hate participation trophies, and yet it's worth knowing that a lot of the transport corps, the people who are doing vehicle repair, the people who are delivering things and mail and working the entire infrastructure, are frequently using pistols as like their only weapon. And yeah, they're frequently loved there. However, their use there also highlights a problem. The same way that a lot of soldiers who are carrying them suddenly being shoved en masse into truck transports highlighted a problem. See, the Model 70 has a bit of an issue. This is a Model 70 cross-section. This is the firing pin. This is the switched firing, the switched hammer safety. It is a physical piece of metal that goes up and blocks the hammer from hitting the firing pin. That is the grip safety that prevents the gun from that same piece of metal that prevents the hammer from engaging. Normally, the grip safety also pushes that up. However, imagine for a moment you were going to hit your gun with a baseball bat right at the muzzle, and the direction of force was going where the arrow in the gun is going. See, there is nothing stopping the firing pin from slamming into the primer. Not the hammer from striking the firing pin, just the firing pin itself. The firing pin is what's referred to as free floating, which means if you're driving a round, there is a non-zero chance when the truck goes over something, the muzzle of the gun will be hitting the truck while the bump goes off. The recoil will be transmitted to the firing pin and the gun will go off. The gun is also used during Korea, but at this point, there are multiple cases of troops either hearing stories about that or, in other cases, being ambushed and not having a round in the chamber and dying as a result. So the M1911 is favorable in some circumstances, but it also has this complicated reputation. So they start looking for a replacement, and what they end up replacing it with is the M9. We'll get into how they replace it in a second. But the replacement for the M1911 is the M9. Now the M9 has a 15-round magazine sitting next to the 7-round magazine of the M1911. It has a firing pin block, so you no longer have to worry about the gun going off if you go over a hard bump. It is ambidextrous. The safety on the original M1911s are all on the left, while the M9 has the safety accessible from both sides. Left-handed people can access it. Also, if you're wounded in your right hand or in your right arm, you can still use the gun with your left arm. which that's kind of everybody. You don't get to choose where you're wounded. And then on top of it, of everything, it has a less recoiling round that allows for larger carry and allows for more controlled fire. And you'd think with all of these benefits, there'd be somebody who's liking it. But yeah, no, everyone just liked that. So it started with the Joint Service Small Arms Program. The idea was that they were going to test a new weapon for everyone. And very shortly after the discussions and the beginning of the XM9 in 1984, the Marines dip out and decide they're going to do their own thing. And the Army takes the results from the XM9 and goes, yeah, this is terrible, we need to do it again, and comes up with the XM10, which is a revision on the original XM9 trials. That Marine Corps goes, Lamau XD, we're using the M1911. Wait, no, it's not an M1911, it's an M45A1 now. It uses a safety that is ambidextrous. It uses a strip of pick rail so that lights and things can be mounted to it, but it is an M1911. And it should also be pointed out that at this point, that Special Forces, their equipment is a shoulder shrug and, well, what do you want to carry? They get to carry basically whatever they want, as long as it's reasonably within their mission and it's not ridiculous for the items to be acquired. Because they're doing really important things. Outside of MARSOC, which is its own weird unit, Special Forces basically get to carry whatever pistol they want, especially because Special Forces are often the units that are using pistols. They're the ones who are being put into a lot of the situations where your ability to shoot with a sidearm will be tested in combat. And it's at this point that we get to the Center for Naval Analysis. Now, the Center for Naval Analysis is very much a down-to-earth, no-nonsense, data-driven group. They're that hard-boiled detective. Just the facts, ma'am. They're also the people from the SRG, the people who came up with survivorship bias, which in and of itself needs its own presentation. But needless to say, it's a lot of people who are data-driven and math-focused. And they generate the 2006 report on small arms in combat, in which 2,608 soldiers who were in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq are asked about their experience and report back. 161 soldiers armed with an M9, 6% total, and those are the only answers that they take. Those are the 161 soldiers that fired in their M9 in combat. So those are the only people whose answers they bother listening to. And everybody hated it. 58% of the people are satisfied with the weapon, which is the lowest satisfaction of any weapon that they check. 50% are dissatisfied with the ammunition, which makes some sense, but honestly should be higher. Anybody who's dissatisfied with the weapon should be dissatisfied with the ammunition. 1 in 4 experience a jam, half of which are magazine related, which goes to show do not buy cheap mags. The military went for Mech-Gar mags for the M9, and there's a reason why half of the jams are magazine related. Nobody was confident about anything. Durability, reliability, range, stopping power. The M9 was kind of hated by everyone. Really, what should have been hated was the M882 ball ammunition that was used by the military. See, this ammunition was full metal jacket. The military had misunderstood the part of the Geneva Convention that talks about exploding ammunition. To be fair, every military in the world had misinterpreted it. But basically everybody had said, well, the fact that that means that we can't put exploding rounds means we can't have hollow points. And so the ammunition that was pushed to pistols was this 9mm ball ammunition, which, yeah, for handguns, it's not particularly effective ammunition. See, the round on the right is an example of a 40 Smith & Wesson full metal jacket being shot through a grapefruit, while the one on the left is a 40 Smith & Wesson hollow point. And the whole point of a hollow point is that you will all of the energy from the round is going to transfer into the impact as it expands. You are not going to have a bullet continuing on in as many cases. And more importantly, the damage that will be done will be far more consequential, because it is not just a simple hole being punched through, it is expanding into the target and causing things to rupture. See, a full metal jacket is what it says on the tin. It has a full jacket that is made out of metal. The core, it will be made of one metal, usually lead, and the outer jacket will be made of a harder metal, in this case brass. Whereas a hollow point, the whole point of a hollow point is they expand into what they are hitting. It's worth knowing that anybody who is going to be using a lot of this equipment was going to be young, and they're going to be, frankly, kind of stupid, and they're going to be beating the fuck out of it. So part of the problem is always going to be that you will have hard abuse of military equipment. And it's not like the M1911 was never known for being abused. The M9 kind of just got more of the same treatment. It is, however, worth knowing that part of the problem was the way that the hammer was seated to the frame. It ended up allowing a lot of dust into the frame, which ended up causing a lot of the springs and pins to have problems. However, despite the fact that most people were using their guns as shovels and then being surprised when they didn't work, despite the fact that most people were refusing to acknowledge that you maybe need to perform basic maintenance of your firearm in order for it to, go past 20,000 rounds, everyone's automatic assumption was, oh, well, the gun must just be crap. Can't be my fault, it must be the gun. We briefly had the M11. That is a Sig 228 that some services adopted and others kind of just skipped past. You have to remember, sidearms are not the way that we fight most wars. They're not the way that we fight in most situations. They're not things that we hard rely on in a lot of cases. So the fact that we technically replaced the M9 didn't mean that most services got rid of their M9s. The M11 ended up kind of just filling in whenever we had new services show up, or new groups come together, or a large enough number of M9s were failing. Then we put together the XM17 trials. Now, this was a set of trials designed to test what the next generation would be. Beretta was given the opportunity to upgrade the Beretta again and make a case for having an A4 generation of maintaining the Beretta. And because they had also been a longtime supporter of the military and a company whose sidearm had been the standard sidearm for over 2 decades at this point, they were given the opportunity to submit their polymer-framed APX as well to be more in line with the rest of those who would be competing. Smith & Wesson submitted the M&P 2.0. CZ submitted the P07. Glock submitted the 19X. The Chris Sphinx was in the competition. Interestingly, STI and Detonics Defense put together the STX, this strange kind of 2011 polymer-framed 1911 trigger in a double-stack magazine. It was a very unique firearm. There's a reason you don't see many of them, though. FN produced the FNS, and SIG came to the competition with their 320. Now, I have heard a lot of people mistake that Glock lost the competition because they didn't have a switch. The Glock that was submitted to the competition had an external safety. There would have been a full line of Glocks produced for the military, and likely many more produced for civilians, with dedicated external safeties if they had gotten the contract. They ended up picking this SIG a 320 platform for the M17 and M18. And the reason that they did was very simple.
Money!
It was just money. It was just straight up money. Sig made them the best offer, and they went with it. All of the guns that were submitted were similar. There were no exceptional winners or losers in terms of capability, in terms of performance, in terms of how they handled, in terms of reliability, in terms of functionality. Sig offered the least amount of money for the most pistols. That is it. None of them were good enough to merit the price difference that was being asked on scale. Now, it's worth bringing up that ever since the 320 has been adopted by the military, and then that adoption has led to a string of copy adoption by huge numbers of police forces across the country, there have been reports and lawsuits over the idea that SIGs are going off on their own. And they're not. I think it actually has more to deal with the XM17 requirements, one of which was a light-bearing capability. Because in the modern thought, fighting handguns should have a light attached to it. I actually kind of agree with that in most cases. But I would also say it's not quite a blanket statement. See, this is a Kydex holster. And you will note that the trigger guard is surrounded and tightly packed by Kydex. This thermoplastic. It is a physical impossibility to get something into the trigger. It is surrounded by plastic. The trigger is very well protected. With a light-bearing holster, you inherently have a space that you have the light. The light is going to be in front of the trigger, and the light is going to be wider than the trigger. That ends up meaning when you go to put it in a holster, you will have a problem where the trigger is far more exposed than it should be. This can lead to negligent discharges. The answer to this is clear your goddamn firearms if you're storing them, and be very wary if you are using a light-mounted holster and moving quickly. SIG themselves have put out multiple warnings about this. However, no matter how much they warn people, no matter how many military briefings that they have, no matter how much they try and explain their position, the people who are buying it are just assuming it can't be my fault, it must be the gun. And that's always going to be the case. Don't make a decision based off of what some military does. You are not a military, you are a random person. So am I. We don't have supply chains, we don't have budgets, we don't have political concerns. We have our existence. Defend it effectively and go from there. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to my Patreon supporters. They're the only reason I get to keep making this stuff. Seriously, the last week or so has been kind of a snafu on a personal level, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate each and every fucking one of you. If you want to support me, if you want to support this channel, the absolute best way, I am on Patreon. You get access to the episodes early, and you get to help me continue existing and making this stuff. Like, I cannot tell you how much how much it means to my life and my ability to continue. But that's going to be it from me. Thank you all for tuning in. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Stay dangerous, y'all. Keep each other safe. And remember, moral doesn't mean legal, and Stonewall was a fucking riot. Peace.